Blitz's chest rose and fell in ragged breaths as his bark tore through the quiet summer forest of Anchorage. The sound wasn't playful. It was sharp, raw, and urgent, cutting through the warm air like a blade. Ethan Miller froze mid-stride, every sense tightening. Blitz stood rigid before a line of 5 fallen trees, their trunks splayed out in one perfect direction, as if something massive had swept them down in a single motion. The German shepherd's paws dug into the earth, nails scraping bark and dirt, his amber eyes fixed on the ground with unnerving focus. The forest should have been calm in the endless daylight, but in that moment, it held its breath. Ethan's pulse quickened as an uneasy thought crept in. Perhaps a secret long buried was about to be dragged into the light. What makes a dog bark like that? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're following now. The summer sun over Anchorage hung stubbornly in the sky, washing the forest in a warm golden glow that refused to fade. Ethan Miller sat on the creaking porch of his small wooden cabin, resting his elbows on his knees, a chipped enamel mug cooling in his hand. He was a man of 42, his face carved by wind, war, and weather. His dark brown hair, streaked with early gray, was cropped close to his head, and a day's worth of stubble shadowed a strong jawline. Years in uniform had left him with a straight back, and the habit of scanning the tree line without realizing it. Once, a roadside explosion in Kandahar had taken 3 of his friends in front of him. That kind of loss leaves a silence inside a man, and Ethan carried that silence quietly, like an invisible weight. Beside him, Blitz shifted, ears twitching. The German shepherd was 5 years old, large and muscular, his black and tan coat gleaming in the late sunlight. His amber eyes were sharp and alive, the kind that always seemed to be listening to something no one else could hear. He had the disciplined posture of a working dog, but the restless energy of a creature built for purpose. Unlike Ethan, Blitz did not dwell on the past. He responded to the present with every fiber of his being. The wind stirred gently, carrying the distant scent of pine sap and damp soil. It was the kind of day that promised nothing more than long hours of quiet, and maybe the sound of a squirrel rustling in the brush. But then Blitz froze. His ears shot upright, his body stiffened like a drawn bow, and a sharp, urgent bark tore from his chest. Ethan's fingers tightened around the mug as Blitz let out another bark, louder this time, and bolted down the porch steps toward the tree line. Ethan cursed under his breath, set the mug aside, and followed. His boots pounded against the packed dirt, then sank into the forest floor, soft with needles and moss. He knew Blitz well enough to tell the difference between curiosity and alarm. This was no casual chase after a rabbit. Something was wrong. The air inside the forest was cooler, the light fractured into long, pale streaks through the canopy. Blitz moved fast but stopped suddenly up ahead, his front paws planted, fur raised slightly along his spine. Ethan slowed as he approached, and then he saw it. 5 towering spruce trees, each as wide as a man's embrace, lay flattened in a perfect line, their massive root systems ripped clean out of the soil. The trees hadn't splintered or twisted the way they would in a windstorm. They had been pushed or dragged in one uniform direction, like dominoes toppled by an unseen hand. The ruts beneath them ran deep into the soft earth, 2 long, parallel grooves stretching into the denser part of the forest, fading into shadow. Ethan knelt, touching the rim of one of the gouges. It was cold, not cool, cold, as if something heavy and metallic had cut through not long ago. He rubbed his fingertips together, feeling a faint grit, like iron dust. The forest was still except for Blitz, who stood a few feet away, tail stiff, letting out a low growl. It wasn't the bark of defense, but something quieter, edged with unease. A gust of wind passed through, and Ethan caught it, a faint metallic tang, sharp and unnatural, threading through the warm summer air. He straightened slowly, his pulse ticking in his ears. Trees don't just fall in straight lines. His eyes scanned the forest edge. No tire tracks, no logging equipment, no boot prints, nothing. But something had been here, something big. Blitz turned his head slightly, ears tilting forward, nose working furiously. He took a cautious step closer to the grooves. Ethan's jaw clenched. He wasn't a man who let his mind run wild. Years in the military had trained him to separate fear from fact, but the clean precision of the fallen trees unsettled him. A storm doesn't leave a pattern like that. Neither does an animal. A branch cracked behind him, and his hand instinctively brushed the empty holster at his hip. He wasn't in uniform anymore. No weapon, just instinct and old reflexes. Blitz whipped around, growling now, more fiercely, but there was nothing in sight, only a pair of ravens startled into the air. Ethan exhaled slowly, telling himself not to let old habits turn shadows into threats. Still, something gnawed at him. The way the light bent across the broken tree line, the way the ground seemed too freshly disturbed, and that smell. He had smelled it before, once, outside a makeshift storage site in Helmand Province. It had been the smell of burned machinery, the kind that lingered after something secret had moved through a place in the dark. Blitz padded closer to the grooves, lowered his head, and let out a sharp bark. Ethan followed the line of the marks with his eyes until they disappeared into a patch of older growth. For a moment, the world around him seemed to still. The sound of distant insects dulled. The forest, which should have been alive with birdsong and wind through leaves, felt like it was waiting. A flicker of unease crossed his face. He had moved to Alaska for the quiet. He'd thought this cabin would give him the distance he needed, from the war, from the noise, from people. But now the quiet felt less like peace and more like the kind of silence that comes before something shifts. He glanced at Blitz, who stared unwaveringly into the tree line, hackles raised just enough to show what he felt. Ethan ran a hand over his stubbled jaw, forcing his thoughts to stay practical. Maybe it was logging equipment, abandoned after some unauthorized work. Maybe someone had been dumping machinery at night. Maybe. But deep down, the rhythm of his heartbeat betrayed him. He knew the pattern of danger too well. He had felt it in deserts, in burned-out streets, in quiet villages before a blast went off. The grooves disappeared into the shadows of the deeper forest, like a path carved by something no one was meant to find. Ethan stood motionless for a moment, the warm light pressing against his shoulders. He didn't move forward. He didn't move back. Blitz gave one last low growl, then looked up at him, amber eyes burning with something Ethan couldn't name but understood instinctively. Something was buried in these woods, and whatever it wasn't meant to stay hidden forever. Morning came slow over Anchorage, a pale gold light spilling across the forest like a secret not meant to be told. Ethan Miller hadn't slept much. The image of the 5 fallen trees kept flashing through his mind, their perfect alignment and those cold metallic grooves carved into the soft earth. Blitz had paced most of the night at the door, occasionally letting out short, clipped barks as if expecting something or someone to return. Ethan sat at his kitchen table, a half-empty coffee mug in his hand, listening to the steady hum of the forest waking up. The quiet should have been comforting. It wasn't. The soft crunch of shoes on gravel drew his attention. A small figure approached the porch, moving with a kind of skittish determination. Lucas Patterson, the boy from the neighboring cabin, was 11 years old but wiry and restless, always carrying an air of having grown up too fast. His skin was sun-kissed from long summer days outside, and his hair was a messy blonde tangle that never quite stayed in place. He often wore the same faded blue hoodie with the elbows fraying, a hand-me-down from his older brother. Lucas was the kind of kid who paid attention to things adults ignored, and today, his pale green eyes carried a nervous brightness that made Ethan straighten in his chair. Lucas hesitated at the edge of the steps, shifting from one foot to the other. "Mr. Miller," he started, his voice uneven. "Last night, I heard something weird." Ethan leaned forward, resting his forearms on his knees. "Weird how?" The boy's hands twisted at the hem of his hoodie. Like metal dragging, long, like it didn't stop. It came from the forest. I couldn't see anything, but it was loud. I thought maybe it was a truck, but it didn't sound like a truck. Ethan felt a chill stir in his gut. He glanced at Blitz, who was already standing near the porch edge, ears forward, tail still. "Show me exactly where you heard it," Ethan said. Lucas nodded quickly, a mix of fear and excitement flashing across his face. The 3 of them walked toward the tree line, the morning air still cool and sharp. Lucas led the way to the spot near the path that cut through toward the deeper forest. The forest was different in the early light, quieter, heavier, as though holding its breath after last night's disturbance. Blitz lowered his head and sniffed the ground methodically, tail lowering into a rigid line. Ethan watched as the dog moved with slow precision, pausing where the dirt path began to curve. Then he saw it. The grooves they had found last night weren't just impressions in the soil. They were tire tracks. Large, wide, too wide for standard trucks. The edges were clean, as if something with heavy treads had rolled through without pause. They cut deeper into the earth than any pickup or logging vehicle he'd ever seen. Ethan crouched, running a calloused hand over the compressed soil. The grooves were cold again. Not damp from morning dew, cold, as if heat had been stripped away. Blitz barked once, a short sound, then began trotting along the tracks, nose close to the ground. Ethan followed, scanning the forest. Lucas trailed a few paces behind, his hands stuffed in his hoodie pocket, trying to look brave. The tracks led them further into the forest than Ethan had gone in months. Soon, the smell of pine thickened, and sunlight turned patchy beneath taller trees. A short distance ahead, Blitz stopped abruptly. His paw pressed against a strip of torn fabric half buried in the mud. Ethan knelt, tugging it free. It was bright orange nylon, industrial grade, the kind used for heavy shipping tarps or cargo straps. The edges were frayed, blackened by friction. Lucas tilted his head. "What's that?" he asked softly. Ethan turned the fabric over in his hand. "Something that shouldn't be here," he muttered. He glanced around again. There were no signs of logging crews, no scent of oil, no splintered wood beyond the already fallen trees. Whatever had come through here had moved deliberately, and quickly. Ethan decided to report it. He walked back toward his cabin, Lucas still close on his heels, while Blitz lingered at the tree line, staring into the shadows as though something unseen was staring back. Ethan grabbed his old radio from the kitchen and made a call to the local ranger station. The voice that answered was clipped, a little too controlled. "Ranger station, this is Officer Frank Duvall," came the reply. Frank was a man Ethan had met a few times at town meetings. He was in his early 50s, thick-bodied with a square jaw and thinning gray hair. The kind of man who had once probably been imposing, but now carried the fatigue of years behind a desk. His tone was practiced, the kind of neutral that hides more than it reveals. Ethan explained what he had found: the tire tracks, the nylon, the fallen trees. There was a pause on the line. Then Frank said flatly, "We'll make a note of it." Ethan frowned. "That's it?" "Yes, that's it. Probably some old equipment transport. We've had a few unauthorized loggers lately. Nothing to worry about." Ethan's grip on the radio tightened. "Those aren't logging tire tracks, Frank. You and I both know that." The other man sighed audibly. "Ethan, I appreciate you looking out for the woods, but let the proper authorities handle it. Don't go poking around in places that don't concern you." And then the line clicked dead. Ethan stood in his kitchen, the radio still pressed to his palm, the silence pressing down harder than before. Blitz padded inside, nails clicking softly on the wooden floor, and looked up at him with those bright amber eyes. Outside, Lucas shuffled nervously. "They don't care," the boy muttered. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to. He could feel it in his chest, the deliberate vagueness in Frank's tone, the way the tracks didn't fit any. Normal explanation, the way Blitz still couldn't settle down. Someone knew more than they were saying. He stepped outside again, letting the sunlight warm his shoulders, but the warmth didn't reach his bones. Blitz stood at the edge of the porch, staring at the direction of the forest as if memorizing it. Ethan followed his gaze, jaw tightening slightly. Somewhere in that forest, something had left its mark, and someone didn't want him to find out what it was. The afternoon sky over Anchorage stretched wide and pale, the kind of washed-out blue that promised warmth but carried an edge of stillness that made Ethan uneasy. Hours had passed since his call with Frank Duvall. The silence from the ranger station had been louder than any response. Ethan paced his porch, hands in the pockets of his worn jacket, Blitz lying a few feet away, head on his paws but eyes constantly flicking toward the tree line. The tire tracks were still fresh in his mind, the way Frank's voice had flattened when he'd reported them. People only used that tone when they were hiding something. There was one person he trusted enough to talk to, someone who wasn't part of the game Frank seemed to be playing. Emma Lee. Ethan hadn't seen Emma in 2 years, not since the avalanche rescue mission outside Talkeetna. She'd been the lead ranger then, sharp and focused, the kind of woman who made people listen without raising her voice. Emma was 34 now, tall and lean, her movements controlled in a way that made her seem perpetually ready for action. Her skin was fair, kissed lightly by sun and wind, and her auburn hair, usually tied into a low, practical braid, carried the scent of pine and earth. Her green eyes held a kind of quiet calculation, the look of someone who had seen disaster up close and didn't trust easy explanations. She had once lost a partner on a mission, a rookie who didn't make it down the mountain. That kind of loss doesn't leave a person. It builds a wall between them and blind trust. Ethan drove his old truck down the gravel road toward the ranger substation where Emma worked. Blitz sat in the passenger seat, his ears flicking at the passing sounds, alert but silent. When they pulled in, Emma was standing outside the small log structure, arms crossed over a ranger uniform jacket. She looked like she'd been expecting him. "You always show up when something's wrong," she said as he stepped out of the truck. Her voice had a dry humor in it, but her eyes were already reading his face, measuring the weight of whatever had brought him there. "Something is wrong," Ethan replied. "The forest behind my place. 5 spruce trees flattened. Perfect line. No storm, no tracks except for something big. I found nylon. Industrial grade. I called Frank." Her posture stiffened at the name. "And?" "He brushed it off," Ethan said, like he already knew. For a moment, the wind pushed a loose strand of her hair across her face, and she tucked it back absently. "Ethan," she said quietly, "that section of forest is sealed. Officially. No entry without clearance." "Sealed for what?" Her jaw tightened. "That's the problem. We were told to lock it down 3 months ago. No explanation, no paperwork, no one goes in, no patrols. It's like the place doesn't exist on the map anymore." Blitz shifted beside Ethan, letting out a low whine as if he too sensed the wrongness hanging between their words. "I need to see it," Ethan said. Emma looked at him for a long moment, the weight of risk flickering behind her eyes. She had never been good at saying no to the truth, even when the truth could hurt. "Not during the day," she finally said. "We go in tonight." The forest looked different under the midnight sun. The endless summer light of Alaska wrapped everything in a strange pale gold, neither night nor day. The trail that had been silent in the morning now felt heavier, as if the air itself thickened near the sealed zone. Blitz walked ahead, his movements controlled, nose working the path, every muscle in his body tuned to something invisible. Ethan and Emma followed the curve of the old service road until they reached the first sign of human interference. Warning tape. Not the flimsy kind used for regular forest maintenance. This was thick, heavy tape, marked with black lettering. Restricted area, no entry, and metal stakes hammered deep into the ground. Behind it, the trees grew unnaturally uniform, stripped of undergrowth, as if something had carved a path through the earth. "Frank didn't put this up," Ethan murmured. "No," Emma replied softly. "This is federal issue. I've seen it once before, back in Idaho after a chemical leak. Only difference is, there's no incident report here. Nothing." They ducked under the tape. The forest fell quieter with each step, even the birds gone silent. Blitz halted suddenly, nose pressing to the ground. His ears were pinned forward, his body coiled tight. A sharp metallic scent clung to the air, stronger than yesterday, almost choking. Then Ethan saw it, a stretch of green tarpaulin partially hidden under low branches. It ran in long sheets, secured to the ground by steel stakes, covering something large beneath. The fabric was weathered but clean, well maintained. Emma crouched, brushing the tarp with her gloved fingers. "This isn't logging," she whispered. "This is containment." Ethan lifted a corner of the tarp. Cold air rushed out from underneath, far too cold for a summer night. Beneath the tarp were metal storage drums, dull silver with bold black hazard labels, symbols for toxic chemicals, corrosion warnings, and a stenciled logo he didn't recognize. Blitz let out a deep, unsettled growl. Ethan pulled the tarp back farther. There wasn't just one drum, there were dozens, and further back, faint shapes of metal hatches embedded into the ground, like the top of a bunker or underground facility. "Jesus," Emma breathed, stepping back. The night didn't feel like a night anymore. It felt like standing on the edge of something deliberately buried. The air carried no sound except for the wind brushing through tarp edges. Ethan turned slowly to Emma. "Whatever this is, it's not supposed to be here." "No," she agreed, voice barely above a whisper. "And someone went to a lot of trouble to keep it that way." Blitz moved closer, to the hatches, sniffing with tense focus, his fur bristling. Ethan's instincts screamed the same thing they had in combat zones. This wasn't just dangerous, it was meant to stay hidden. The two exchanged a long, weighted look. Neither needed to say it. They were past the point of turning back. The sun never truly sets in the Alaskan summer. A pale, lingering glow clung to the treetops as midnight approached, painting everything in a washed-out gold that made the forest look both alive and ghostly. Ethan stood at the edge of the restricted zone, the camera strap pressing against the back of his neck, his heartbeat steady but tense. He wasn't a man easily rattled, but tonight felt different. A line had been crossed when he lifted that tarp and saw what lay beneath. Emma crouched beside him, flashlight in one hand, her auburn braid resting against the shoulder of her ranger jacket. Blitz prowled silently a few feet ahead, muscles tight, tail stiff, his ears flicking at every faint sound. The dog moved like a soldier who knew a perimeter had already been breached. They'd come back not as intruders with questions, but as witnesses who needed proof. Ethan adjusted the camera lens and exhaled slowly. "No second chances," he muttered. Emma didn't look at him, but the corner of her mouth tightened. "We get the evidence, and we get out. Fast." The restricted clearing was quieter than it had been the night before. The tarp-covered drums sat in neat, precise rows like silent soldiers. The air reeked faintly of chemicals, sharper now that the night was cooler. The faint hum of generators drifted through the trees, low but constant, like the heartbeat of something mechanical buried underground. Blitz stiffened suddenly, nose lifted into the air. "What is it?" Emma whispered. Ethan's eyes scanned the tree line, picking up a faint shimmer of light through the brush. It wasn't moonlight. It moved. He raised the camera and hit record. Blitz's growl was soft but deep, the sound of a warning. The beam of light grew sharper. Then came the sound of boots, multiple pairs, pressing through soft earth with the rhythm of men trained to move as one. A faint clink of metal on metal followed. Ethan's stomach tightened. They weren't alone. The first figure emerged from the tree line, moving with the practiced caution of someone who'd done this 100 times before. He wore a white hazmat suit, the hood down, revealing a rugged man in his late 40s, with a broad jaw, weathered skin, and a closely shaved salt and pepper beard. His eyes were a pale, washed-out blue, the kind that saw everything but revealed nothing. He carried himself like someone who had been military once, shoulders squared, scanning every angle, but now worked in the shadows of something less honorable. 3 others followed him, all in similar suits, their faces hidden behind clear visors. They moved without speaking, communicating in small gestures and nods. Each of them carried equipment, one a case marked with radiation warnings, another with a compact rifle slung low but ready. Emma hissed, "Ethan!" But before she could finish, Blitz erupted into a sharp, piercing bark that shattered the quiet like breaking glass. The men turned instantly, the leader's pale eyes locked onto them through the brush. "We've got company!" he barked, his voice low but commanding. "Run!" Ethan breathed. Emma didn't hesitate. She snapped the camera off its tripod, stuffed the memory card into her jacket pocket, and sprinted for the tree line. Ethan grabbed Blitz's collar, but the dog twisted free, launching forward with the precision of a trained K9. He hit one of the suited men hard in the chest, knocking him backward into the dirt. Another shouted, fumbling with his weapon, but Blitz was already snarling, snapping at his arm. Ethan lunged to follow, but was tackled from behind. A heavy forearm pinned his neck, another hand wrenching his arm behind his back. The smell of rubber and disinfectant from the hazmat suit filled his nose. He gritted his teeth, twisting, but the man holding him was built like an oak tree. Thick arms, thick chest, breathing steady. Ethan caught a glimpse of his attacker's face through the hood. Mid-30s, clean-shaven, a scar cutting diagonally from his temple to his jaw. Cold, flat eyes. Emma's boots pounded against the dirt as she disappeared deeper into the forest, clutching the card like it was oxygen. One of the hazmat men cursed and went after her, but Blitz lunged in his path. A single gunshot cracked through the air, not at Blitz, but into the ground to scare him back. He didn't flinch. Pinned against the dirt, Ethan forced his head to the side. That's when he saw it. Parked just beyond the tree line was a large white truck, Matty painted with a logo stamped on the door. Northridge Energy Corporation. He'd seen that name before. They were a powerful energy conglomerate, supposedly running solar and natural gas operations across Alaska. But nothing about what he'd seen in that clearing said legal. The leader of the group stepped into Ethan's field of vision. Up close, the lines around his mouth were sharp, carved from years of giving orders no one dared question. He crouched down just enough so Ethan could see the faint emblem on his suit's sleeve, a black eagle over a sunburst, not a government insignia, private, dangerous. "You picked the wrong place to wander into, friend," the man said softly. His voice was calm, almost polite, which somehow made it worse. Blitz growled low, standing over the fallen man like a wolf guarding a kill. The leader glanced at him, but didn't flinch. "We've got a problem," one of the suited men called from the tree line. "The woman's gone." The leader straightened, face hardening. "Then she's got something we can't afford her to keep." Ethan was yanked to his feet, his wrists zip-tied behind his back. His muscles burned with the familiar rage he used to feel before a firefight. Except this time, there were no brothers in arms beside him, just Blitz. The leader gave a short nod to his men. "Bag him, load the truck, we'll sweep for the woman." As one of the men moved forward with a shield, black canvas hood, Blitz lunged, snarling, a blur of fur and fury. He caught the man's arm in his jaws, dragging him backward. The others shouted. For a split second, chaos cracked the organized precision of their operation. Ethan caught a glimpse of Emma through the trees, a fleeting shadow, before the hood came down over his head and everything went black. The pale gold of the white night bled across the fallen trees, the same place where it had all begun. Somewhere deep in the forest, Blitz barked, a single, defiant sound that cut through the darkness. The morning sky over Anchorage burned gold, the kind of summer light that flattened shadows and made even dark things seem distant and unreal. But the world had shifted since that night in the forest. Northridge Energy Corporation was no longer a faceless name on a truck. It was now the subject of a federal investigation that had spread like wildfire across Alaska. Emma Lee stood before a crowd of journalists outside the Ranger substation, a hand steady on the podium as camera flashes popped like distant thunder. She wasn't a politician, and the wind toyed with her auburn braid as she spoke, but her voice carried the clarity of someone who had seen too much to remain silent. On the screens behind her, the footage she and Ethan had risked everything to record played out. The tarp being pulled back, the barrels, the hidden hatches, the men in hazmat suits. The silence in the crowd was the kind of silence that happens when everyone knows they are witnessing something that can't be taken back. A tall woman with sleek black hair and a sharp navy suit stood to the side of the podium, listening intently. Special Agent Diana Knox, 39, from the Environmental Crime Task Force, had flown in from Washington less than 24 hours after the footage broke. Her presence was a statement. She was lean, angular, with precise movements and cool gray eyes that seemed to measure the world like an equation. Her reputation preceded her, ruthless in pursuit of environmental crimes, unshakable under pressure. Her colleagues said she had once single-handedly forced the shutdown of a billion-dollar illegal dumping ring on the Great Lakes. Ethan watched from the back of the crowd, a gauze bandage still wrapped around his left wrist where zip ties had bitten deep. Blitz sat obediently by his side, the sun warming his thick coat. The German shepherd's ears twitched at the noise, but his gaze never left the tree line beyond the substation. He was 5 years old, strong and disciplined, but more than anything, Blitz had always trusted instinct, and that instinct told him their work wasn't finished. After the press conference, Agent Knox approached Ethan directly. She walked with the confidence of someone who expected people to make room for her. "Ethan Miller," she said, her voice low but firm, "we're going back in. We have authorization for a federal raid. I want you and your dog with us." Ethan studied her for a moment. She was all business, the kind of person who didn't waste words or pretend danger wasn't real. "You've seen what's in there," he replied. "Yes," she said, meeting his eyes evenly. "And I want to make sure we get it before they erase it." The helicopters thundered low over Eklutna Lake that evening, scattering a flock of gulls as they swept toward the tree line. Eklutna was a place of quiet beauty. Clear blue waters, spruce and birch forests hugging the shore, mountains rising like old sentinels in the distance. But tonight, it was about to become a battlefield. A joint federal task force had formed. Tactical agents in black vests moved in tight formations, flanked by local rangers and environmental specialists. Ethan walked at the front of one squad, Blitz at his heel. Emma moved just behind, wearing tactical gear loaned by the agents, her expression taut but resolute. Knox led the operation, her voice crisp over the radio. "Team 1, secure the south perimeter. Team 2, approach from the access road. Eyes open. These people know the terrain." The clearing where the barrels had been hidden was eerily quiet when they reached it. The tarp was gone, the steel drums too, but the air still carried the acrid sting of chemicals, and the earth bore fresh tracks, deep ruts leading toward the lake. Ethan crouched, fingers brushing the cool soil. "They've moved everything." Knox scanned the area with narrowed eyes. "They're trying to destroy the evidence. The only place they can dump something this size without drawing eyes." She turned toward the water. Blitz's ears flicked up sharply. He let out a short bark, then broke into a run toward the lake shore. Ethan followed, heart pounding. At the edge of the lake, partially obscured by reeds and birch, sat 2 flatbed trucks and a dark green barge moored to a makeshift dock. On the deck were the same men in hazmat suits, loading the last of the steel drums onto the vessel. The leader was there too, the man with the salt and pepper beard and those icy blue eyes. He barked orders while scanning the tree line, as if sensing the net closing around him. Ethan could almost smell the arrogance on him. Men like that believed they'd always have another way out. "Positions," Knox's voice came through the radio. "We move on my signal." The agents fanned out. Ethan took cover behind a cluster of spruce. Blitz crouched low beside him. The warm summer air buzzed with the sound of insects and distant rotor blades, but beneath it ran a different current, anticipation sharp as a drawn blade. The signal came, a sharp "go" over the radio. Tactical units surged forward, black figures against the gold-lit lake. Gunfire cracked the silence, warning shots. The men on the dock scattered like startled crows. Ethan sprinted toward the barge, Blitz charging ahead. The German shepherd leapt onto the ramp with terrifying precision, his growl splitting the air. The leader spun around, drawing a sidearm, but Blitz was faster, colliding with his chest and sending him staggering backward. Ethan vaulted up behind, slamming the man into the steel railing with a force that rattled through both of them. Knox appeared at the ramp, barking commands, while agents secured the other men. One of them, a younger man with a nervous twitch and pale freckles dusting his nose, tried to flee, but Emma tackled him into the gravel. She wasn't a soldier, but she'd grown up in these woods. She knew how to move. Then a sharp, metallic hiss filled the air. Ethan turned just in time to see one of the men on the barge slap a detonator against the railing. "They're going to blow it," he shouted. Knox's voice roared across the clearing. "Fall back!" The explosion ripped through the night in a flash of orange and black. The shockwave hit the shore like a hammer, knocking Ethan off his feet. Blitz tumbled into the grass but scrambled upright almost instantly. The barge was engulfed in flames, sending thick black smoke spiraling into the flawless summer sky. But the agents had pulled back in time, no lives lost, and no more hiding. Hours later, as the sun blazed low but unyielding over the lake, the last of the suspects were being loaded into federal vans. Knox stood near the shoreline, hands on her hips, soot streaking the side of her face, but her eyes sharp and alive. "It's over," she said quietly. Ethan sat on a boulder at the edge of the water, Blitz stretched at his feet. The dog's chest rose and fell in calm, steady breaths now, no longer on alert. Emma approached with 2 paper cups of black coffee, handing one to him. They didn't need words. Above the tree line, the sky glowed gold and endless. The forest, for now, was safe. When the smoke faded over Eklutna Lake and the forest finally exhaled, there was a quiet that felt almost holy, not the silence of fear, but the kind that follows after a storm, when light finds its way back through the broken branches. Ethan sat with Blitz by his side, and in that golden summer glow, it was impossible not to believe that something greater had watched over them that night. Some people call it luck, others call it courage, but sometimes it's a whisper from God, reminding us that darkness doesn't win when good people choose to stand up, that even in the deepest shadows of greed, there is light waiting to be revealed. And maybe that same quiet miracle exists in our everyday lives too, in the neighbor who lends a hand, in the friend who shows up, in a loyal dog who never gives up. If you believe in standing for what's right, if you've ever felt that quiet nudge in your heart, share this story. Leave a comment. Subscribe to this channel, and may God bless you and your loved ones, guiding your steps just as He guided Ethan and Blitz through the storm. May the light of faith keep your heart steady, even when the world grows dark.